Leonard Bernstein is, in my opinion, the most important musical figure in the 20th century. And I don't say that lightly, but Bernstein had such a genius, such a way of connecting with people of every background imaginable, the way that he could teach. The only other composer that I can think that had that level of genius was Mozart, in the sense that anything that Bernstein did, he did not only to the fullest, but better than anybody. He composed, he conducted, he played the piano, he wrote books, he taught. Anything that this man put his mind to, he lived life to the fullest. He did it better than anybody. And with such joy that people immediately were inspired by that. Anybody who ever saw Bernstein or attended one of his performances will tell you that it was probably the most unforgettable thing they've ever experienced. And I'm amongst one of them. I had the privilege of playing with him. And I counted it as a life-changing event when I was in school. I wanted to, for me it was, I want to do that. He was so powerful because he was not conducting or making music, he was living life to the fullest. And the way that he was able to inspire those of us to achieve higher ground is, as I said, something that made me realize that this is what I wanted to dedicate my life to. So because of all of the different things that he dedicated his life to, we, I think, gained a lot by it. He was active socially, he was active politically, and he was not afraid to say what was in his mind. And because of that, of course, he brought on enemies to him as well. And early on, the critics did not take him seriously, especially the fact that he was an American conductor at a time when most of the classical music were coming from Europe. But being bred in the United States, born in the United States, and making a career, making it to the New York Philharmonic, eventually he proved all his critics wrong. And in many ways he had to keep convincing everybody that he was worthy. And nowadays here we are, celebrating the 100th anniversary of this composer that is probably, as I said, the most important musical figure of the 20th century.
You know, it also strikes me too that if you think about his music in the context of where we are now as a society, that sense of conscience that he brought to what he did as well is really so critical. Like, I mean, it's not he was the only composer who necessarily looked at his music through the lens of having social impact, but that he was so vocal about that, right?
Well, but he was also the most famous.
Yeah.
That was not shying away and was not ambiguous about where his ideas and his thoughts were. And because of that, I think in some cases that alienated a certain part of potential audiences because they might have not agreed with his views politically or personally. But that never stopped him because, as I said, he was such a committed and truly and true to his own beliefs that he could not be hypocritical about it. And his pieces, his music at times and his conducting could be over the top, but he was so glorious that you could never accuse him of doing things halfway.
So to celebrate his legacy in one concert, and fortunately we have the season to explore this through, but also, so when you thought about this concert, if we're going to use this as a celebration, so how do you put that together to summarize the impact of that career?
How do you put 2 hours of music of a composer that gave us so much? So it's a combination of his greatest hits, as well as some of the works that during his lifetime were not perhaps taken as seriously. To a lot of people, they may not realize that Bernstein, besides being the great film composer and the great Broadway composer and the great conductor of the New York Philharmonic, was also a very serious symphonist. He wrote 3 symphonies, and on this program we are doing his first symphony called Jeremiah, which is actually from the 1940s. This is even before the New York Philharmonic. He still hadn't decided whether he wanted to go into composition, whether he wanted to go into conducting. So he wrote this piece kind of on the side to see what was going to happen. And it took a while for the piece to kind of, get some legs. It actually took for him to become famous as a conductor for his music to be, taken seriously. But even then, only he conducted his own pieces. So this program will include this first symphony, which is, as I said, from the days when there was a little bit of conflict of what he wanted to do with his life. Of course, on the same program, West Side Story, the symphonic dances, which is not only from the movie point of view, but from musical point of view, it's one of the most famous tunes that you can find. And also On the Waterfront, that great movie by Eli Kazan that Bernstein wrote the film for, was nominated for an Oscar and actually did not win it, which was a great source of frustration for Bernstein. Actually, he gave up Hollywood after that. He said he'd done it with that because he felt it was all political. But it gave us one of the great musical scores. And we're going to be playing a symphonic suite from On the Waterfront. And then something from Broadway, On the Town, which he also wrote. So this was a man that any project that he worked in, nowadays is part of the American psyche. And in this concert, we're going to get to see Bernstein, the playful, fun composer we all know, but also the serious musician that wanted to get some respect. And here we are, all around the world, 100 years of this incredible musician. We're all observing it, and here in Nashville, because of our commitment to American music, we have to stop and reflect and celebrate the great life of this amazing conductor.
So when you look at sort of the three great 20th century American composers, Bernstein, Copland, Gershwin, they each have a very particular sound that you think of as being distinctly American, but they're also very unique unto themselves, right? How would you qualify the uniquely American qualities of Bernstein's music? Well,
Gershwin did not really leave us much, compositions orchestrally speaking. Of course, he gave us a lot on the Broadway side, but his output was very limited. Copland and Bernstein were very close, and in many cases they inspired each other, and they helped each other, but they could not be more different compositionally speaking. Copland from the beginning was dedicated to be a composer, and he wrote music just for that purpose. He did try to become a conductor, but that did not work very well. He did not have the natural talent to wave a stick, but musically and mentally he did have it. And he always went and looked for Bernstein for advice on how to beat things. And opposite that, Bernstein went to Copland to seek advice on his composing. And it's remarkable how, in some ways, when you hear certain pieces, you hear the influence from both of them. At a time when there are other composers like William Schumann and Roy Harris, Elliott Carter, composers that are kind of pushing the envelope in what American music might be. In many cases, both Bernstein and Copland were very traditional and were not afraid to use the American language, whatever that is, in terms of jazz and rhythm and even the new rock and roll that was happening in the 1950s. They were totally influenced by it. And both of these composers, I think you can think of being very nationalistic. And of course, America has changed a lot, even since Bernstein's death, almost 30 years ago. So it's remarkable to see how we continue to expand what American music means. But of course, without Copland and Bernstein and Gershwin, it's a very good starting point.
The sort of direct impact that Bernstein even had on this orchestra through
Kenneth, yeah. One of the aspects about Bernstein which is very important is the fact that he was a gifted teacher and a very natural teacher, and who cherished mentoring young conductors. So nowadays we have people like Michael Tilson Thomas, who was one of his early proteges, and who's now, of course, has had a great career. And our own Kenneth Skemmerhorn here, at one point, was also a protege of Bernstein. And Bernstein was never afraid to give of his time to make sure that these conductors learned their lessons. And the impact that he's had, I think, directly in the Nashville Symphony is obvious, because I do know that Kenneth programmed quite a lot of Bernstein's music. And one of my greatest regrets is the fact that I never got a chance to meet Kenneth personally, even though everywhere I look I see his legacy. And I am in complete admiration of everything he did, not only for the symphony, but for Nashville as a whole. And I have to say that when I was preparing for this, programming this gala opening for the Centennial, I actually went back and found pictures of Kenneth with Bernstein. And I have to tell you, they became a source of inspiration, because you can see a great deep respect amongst them. And I have a feeling that not only Bernstein, but Kenneth as well, is looking down and being very proud of what's taking place, and happy to see that as an institution, we're taking the time to honor somebody that made an impact in his own life. I know it made an impact on my own life, and celebrating it with fantastic music. And what a great way to open another fantastic season for the Nashville Symphony.